For decades, Julie Andrews was seen as the embodiment of calm, kindness, and reassurance. A woman whose voice soothed generations, whose smile promised safety, whose presence felt unbreakable. But behind that composure was a silence she maintained for most of her life. Now, in the final chapter of her story, Julie Andrews is no longer protecting the myth. She is finally speaking about what she lost, what she endured, and what she learned to live without. A childhood built on survival, not dreams. Julie Andrews was born Julia Elizabeth Wells on October 1st, 1935 in England, at a time when safety was already fragile and stability was never guaranteed. By the time she was old enough to form memories, the world around her was collapsing. London was under attack, air raid sirens were routine, and the German Blitz turned ordinary nights into moments of terror. Families huddled in shelters. Buildings disappeared overnight. Childhood, as most people understand it, simply did not exist. At home, things were no calmer. Her parents' marriage collapsed early in her life, and the separation placed Julie between two very different worlds. With her father, Edward Wells, she experienced gentleness, structure, and a sense of care. He read to her at night, spoke softly, and gave her the rare feeling of being protected. But that home was not where she lived most of the time. With her mother, Barbara Ward Morris, and her stepfather, Ted Andrews, life was chaotic, unstable, and often frightening. Both adults struggled with alcoholism. Arguments were common, emotional control was unpredictable, money was scarce. The war only amplified everything. Food was rationed, fear was constant, and slowly, without ceremony, Julie was pushed into a role no child should ever carry. She did not begin performing because she wanted applause. She began because the family needed money. Ted Andrews, a vaudeville performer, recognized her extraordinary vocal range almost immediately. She possessed perfect pitch and a voice that seemed impossible for a child. That gift became the family's lifeline. Julie joined her parents on stage, entertaining troops and audiences while bombs fell not far away. By her early teens, she was no longer just contributing. She was supporting the household. She became the primary breadwinner, paying bills and even contributing to the mortgage. School became secondary. Normal routines disappeared. She never finished high school. College was never an option. Her identity formed around responsibility, discipline, and survival. At the same time, boundaries inside the home continued to erode. When Julie was 9 years old, her stepfather entered her bed under the guise of comfort while her mother was away. Years later, as a teenager, he made another advance while drunk, forcing her to lock her bedroom door at night. These moments were not discussed. They were buried. There was no space for confrontation. There was only endurance. At 14, another truth shattered what little emotional footing she had. After a performance, her mother told her that the man she had just met was her biological father. Edward Wells, the man she loved and trusted, was not related to her by blood. The revelation came suddenly, without preparation, and left Julie questioning everything. She would meet her biological father only a handful of times in her life, choosing instead to protect the man who had raised her by never confronting the truth. Broadway made her strong. Hollywood taught her silence. By the time Julie Andrews arrived in America, she was no longer a child chasing dreams. She was a disciplined professional, shaped by years of pressure, responsibility, and survival. In 1954, her Broadway debut in The Boyfriend did more than introduce her to American audiences. It revealed a performer with total control. Her voice was effortless. Her timing was precise. Critics took notice immediately. Within a short period, she was no longer just promising. She was undeniable. That momentum carried her directly into the role that would define her early career. On Broadway, she originated Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, a part that demanded vocal stamina, emotional range, and transformation night after night. Julie did not simply perform the role, she inhabited it. Audiences watched her shift from raw, abrasive innocence into poise and elegance in real time. The production became historic, and her name became inseparable from it. At the same time, she reached an even wider audience through live television. Her performance in Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella introduced her to millions of viewers in a single night. It was not a film. There were no second takes. Everything depended on control and trust in her voice. She delivered flawlessly. By her early 20s, she had conquered Broadway and live television, two of the most unforgiving arenas in entertainment. But Hollywood operated by different rules. When plans began for the film adaptation of My Fair Lady, logic suggested an easy transition. Julie Andrews had proven she could sing the score, carry the character, and command audiences. Instead, she was quietly passed over. Studio executives chose Audrey Hepburn, a far more established film star. Julie was told, politely but firmly, that she was not box office. She had never made a movie. She was a risk. Julie did not publicly protest. She did not lash out. She later admitted that she understood the decision, even though it stayed with her. This was the moment she learned an essential lesson about Hollywood. Talent alone was not enough. Visibility mattered more. Marketability mattered more. Silence mattered most of all. Ironically, that rejection cleared the path for something even larger. Soon after, Walt Disney cast her as Mary Poppins, trusting her to carry an expensive production on her shoulders without prior film experience. The gamble paid off. Her performance was controlled, warm, and exacting. The film was a massive success, and she won the Academy Award for Best Actress. That same year, Audrey Hepburn lost the Oscar race for My Fair Lady, when perfection became a prison. After Mary Poppins transformed Julie Andrews into an international star, there was no slowing down. The success was immediate, overwhelming, and absolute. Audiences did not just admire her performance, they trusted her. She became a symbol, a figure associated with safety, optimism, and moral clarity. For Hollywood, she was no longer just an actress. She was reassurance itself. That image solidified completely with the sound of music. When Julie stepped into the role of Maria, the story mirrored parts of her own life more closely than audiences realized. A woman shaped by discipline, responsibility, and music. Someone who learned to survive chaos by maintaining order. The film resonated globally, not simply because of its songs, but because of the emotional stability she projected. She became the voice families trusted, the presence parents welcomed, the figure children felt protected by. The scale of the success was unprecedented. The film dominated the box office and embedded her image permanently into popular culture. But with that level of adoration came something Julie Andrews quietly feared. She was being defined too narrowly. Two iconic roles, back-to-back, had turned her into Hollywood's embodiment of purity. That image was powerful, but it was also restrictive. Julie was acutely aware of what happened to actresses once the industry decided they were predictable. She had seen how quickly admiration could turn into dismissal. So she made a deliberate choice. She began taking roles designed to challenge the perception of her as untouchable and sweet. She wanted complexity. She wanted contradiction. She wanted to show that she was more than a comforting presence. Some of those choices unsettled audiences. Films like the Americanization of Emily and later Torn Curtain placed her in morally ambiguous, emotionally colder environments. These were not musicals. They required restraint rather than warmth. Hollywood accepted the shift cautiously. Critics were divided. Audiences were uncertain. The real turning point came with projects that carried enormous expectations and devastating consequences. Star was intended to be a prestige production that would confirm her range. Instead, it became one of the most expensive disappointments of its time. Critics accused her performance of being excessive and theatrical, The tone was wrong. The public response was unforgiving. Love, failure, and the habit of blaming herself. While Julie Andrews was navigating professional uncertainty, her personal life was unraveling just as quietly. In 1959, she married Tony Walton, a gifted designer she had known since childhood. Their relationship was rooted in history, shared ambition, and genuine affection. Together they built a life that from the outside appeared stable and creative. They welcomed a daughter, Emma, and continued to collaborate professionally. But the reality behind the scenes was far less balanced. Julie's career demanded constant travel and absolute focus. Tony's work was equally consuming. They lived in parallel schedules, rarely slowing down at the same time. The pressures were not explosive, but cumulative. There were no scandals, no public arguments, just distance, exhaustion, and a growing sense that something essential was slipping away. When the marriage ended, Julie did not react with anger. She reacted with shame. She later described the divorce as one of the most painful moments of her life, not because of betrayal, but because she felt she had failed. Marriage, to her, was a responsibility she believed she should have been able to carry. When it collapsed, she turned the disappointment inward. The emotional toll deepened when her daughter chose to live with her father. Julie understood the decision, but the separation reinforced her fear that success came at the cost of intimacy. For the first time, she sought therapy. It was not an act of weakness. It was survival. Therapy helped her recognize how much of her adult life had been shaped by childhood trauma, by control, and by silence. Not long after, she met Blake Edwards outside a therapist's office. The coincidence felt almost scripted. Edwards was brilliant, charismatic, and deeply troubled. He carried his own history of depression, health anxiety, and emotional volatility. Their connection was immediate, intense, and complicated. They married quickly. Their marriage would last more than 4 decades, but it was never easy. Blake struggled with dark moods and periods of despair. There were moments when Julie feared for his safety. There were tensions with his former relationships. There were rumors, temptations, and betrayals that tested her patience. Yet she stayed, not out of obligation, but because she understood brokenness. She had lived inside it her entire life. Professionally, they worked together repeatedly. Some projects succeeded. Others failed spectacularly. When those films collapsed, Julie absorbed the criticism alongside her husband. She never separated her loyalty from her identity. If something went wrong, she believed she should endure it. The decision she knew was wrong. By the mid-1990s, Julie Andrews was no longer chasing validation. She had already proven herself on stage, on screen, and across generations. When she returned to Broadway in Victor/Victoria, it was not about revival. It was about control. For the first time in years, she felt grounded again, performing live, commanding a role built around precision, intelligence, and restraint. But as the production continued, something felt off. Julie began to notice subtle changes in her voice, not dramatic cracks, not pain, just a weakness that appeared occasionally, a swelling that came and went. She described it later as a small, vulnerable spot. Nothing alarming, nothing unfamiliar to someone who had used her voice intensely for decades. Still, she did what she had always done when something threatened her ability to perform. She sought professional advice. The examination revealed a cyst on her vocal cord. The doctor warned her that if it wasn't addressed, she would not survive the demands of touring. It was framed as a practical decision, almost an obligation. Fix the problem now or risk losing everything later. Julie hesitated. Years later, she admitted something crucial. She knew instinctively that the surgery felt wrong. She felt it in her body, in her voice, in her gut. But she ignored that feeling. She later said she did not respect her own voice enough. That sentence carries enormous weight. Because for Julie Andrews, respect had always meant compliance, trusting authority, not questioning experts, not becoming a problem. In June of that year, she agreed to the operation. What was supposed to be routine became irreversible. The surgery caused permanent scarring. Scar tissue prevented her vocal cords from vibrating naturally. When she woke up, the voice that had defined her life, her 4-octave range, her clarity, her control, was gone. This was not a gradual loss. It was immediate. Singing was no longer possible. Even speaking became difficult. The voice that had saved her family during the war, that had carried her through abuse, poverty, rejection, and fame, was suddenly silent. For Julie Andrews, this was not just a professional setback. It was an existential collapse. What she finally admitted at 89. After losing her singing voice, Julie Andrews did not disappear. But she did withdraw in a way the public did not immediately recognize. She stopped chasing roles built around what she no longer had. She stopped pretending the loss did not matter. For a long time, she simply endured it quietly. She explored every possible option. Additional medical procedures followed. Specialists tried new techniques. Some improvement came to her speaking voice, but the instrument she had relied on since childhood never returned. There would be no comeback tour, no triumphant vocal recovery. That chapter was closed. For a woman whose identity had been built around discipline and usefulness, idleness was dangerous. She later admitted that without something creative to hold on to, she feared losing her balance entirely. That fear pushed her toward something unexpected: writing. Together with her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, Julie began writing children's books. At first, it was modest, a way to stay busy, a way to stay connected. But over time, it became a lifeline. Book after book followed. Stories about imagination, theater, curiosity, and finding joy beneath the surface. Emma handled the technical work. Julie shaped the ideas. Their collaboration deepened their bond in a way that performance never could. This was not a replacement for singing. Julie never claimed that it was. She was clear about that. Losing her voice remained the greatest disappointment of her life, but writing gave her something else: purpose without performance, creation without exposure. As she entered her late 80s, she began speaking more openly than ever before, about her childhood, about abuse, about fear, about insecurity, and finally about the surgery that changed everything. What she confirmed was not a conspiracy or a hidden villain. It was something far quieter and more painful. She confirmed that she had known the surgery felt wrong. She confirmed that she ignored her own instincts. She confirmed that her lifelong habit of not saying no to authority, to pressure, to expectations, had followed her into that operating room. Do you believe Julie Andrews' greatest loss was her voice, or the instinct to trust herself sooner? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who grew up listening to her voice, listening